theyeshiva.net.
We began the Maimer from the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, known as Heichaltzu, Tafresh Nun Tes, the Maimer of Heichaltzu, that was said in the year Tafresh Nun Tes, 1898. And we're up to Seif Hey. Seif Hey is chapter 5 of the Maimer. In the copies, it's page Reish Chav Ches. Adaink, thank you for looking. The middle of the page, Bazeh Yuvan. So, just the summation, mamish, of what we learned last time. When Chazal speak about hatred between people, they often use the term sinas chinam, which means baseless hatred. Sinna that's chinam, it's in vain. It sounds like it's not. There's no reason for it. And the obvious question is, so why you hate? If it doesn't do anything for me, why would I hate? Just lishma? Shem shemayim? Just to hate for the sake of hating? Like, it has to give me something. But they use this term, they want to bring out something. So the main point that was explained was that actually this term captures a fundamental and painful truth about a person's life. And that is, sometimes there is a hatred that comes because of a specific reason. For example, you hurt me, you threatened me, you damaged me, whatever form that took. He says there's another sinner that even though a person will find reasons and justifications and explanations and rationalizations, but they ultimately come afterwards. And therefore the sinner is called a sinas chinam, because all the reasons that are there are really just confirmations or justifications or rationalizations for the hatred. So what then is the cause of it? He said this already has to do with something inside me, inside the person. It's not about what you did or what you didn't do, what you said or what you didn't say. This is something that's coming from inside the person themselves. And what is it? So to use the terminology, what it is there's something called yeshus versus something called bittul. Yeshus literally means somethingness. Bittul means nothingness. But you have to explain very well what that means, because it could sound the opposite of what it is. Yeshus really means that a person in their deep, deep space experiences themselves as separate from the source, separate from infinity, and therefore they need to become self-contained and need to create a somethingness that substitutes their true self. So the ultimate yeshus, the ultimate ego, comes because of the fact that the person is not aware in an experiential way. I'm not now talking about intellectually, you could say a lot of things, but I'm talking about viscerally, how you really experience yourself. You know, you could talk and explain things, but as you know, the body, it's about my nervous system and my impulses and my sensations and my feelings and my internal experiences. It's not just a lecture in a cerebral way. So a person can hear these words, but we're talking about, it permeates me, it penetrates me. You know, headin and deadheadin, as they say in Yiddish. The headin, so the deadheadin. So there's the person, they experience themselves as bittul. What's pshat bittul? That the person understands that their very identity is an extension and part and parcel and a manifestation of Hashem. Einoid mulvada. And therefore, the very I of the person is connected to the entire world and connected to all of reality and connected to the core of reality, which is the Ribbono Shel Olam, Hashem. So the I of the person is really a much more powerful I because of the bittul, because bittul means that I'm not separate, I'm not broken, I'm not detached, I'm not lonely, I'm not isolated, but actually I'm attached, I'm connected. And therefore I could connect to people in a very deep place as well. Because in that place there's space there's space for all. On the contrary, everyone is an indispensable part and an indispensable note in the cosmic divine symphony. Or in the words of the Mishnah, Chayev kol echad loymar, every person is a b'shvili nivra ha'olam. There's something at stake in my existence which the entire world needs. What's the condition of Yeshus? The condition of Yeshus is I have to protect something that's very fragile. What is it? It doesn't really exist. Whenever you have to protect something that doesn't exist, it becomes very difficult. Because you're trying to protect something that doesn't really exist. So you have to create fake protections. They say that Winston Churchill once said about during the Second World War, that during a time of war, the truth is so precious, it has to be protected by bodyguard of lies. The truth is so precious, it has to be protected by a bodyguard of lies. When this truth, the truth of who a person is hidden, it's not revealed, it's not manifested. So then, the human being needs to replace that with a false ego, which is called Yeshus, a sense that I am something, in order to be able to feel my validation. When I don't experience real love, I have to substitute it with looking for a type of validation that will make me fill that void, that will help me fill that void and compensate for that inner sense of inadequacy. And this exists on many, many levels. In other words, somebody wrote to me yesterday or 2 days ago. I spoke a lot about trauma in the last year, right? About that concept. Not the word trauma, but the word also, but the concept of what happens to people. But the truth is, what happens to people is already the step two. The very birth of the neshama coming into this world, we learn a lot about the tzimtzum. That is the greatest trauma. It's the sense of separateness. You become in your mind. You could become separate. Now a lot of things play out afterwards. Trauma, trauma. That already depends on everybody's circumstances of life. How many times was my heart shattered by the time I was 6 years old? How many times was your heart broken by the time you were 6 or 7 or 8? That's kol chadafim shura delay, every person where they are. But the nekuda here is that the great ego that we talk about is the ego that comes from a sense of detachment, aloneness, and therefore I have to hold on to this uptight sense of self to compensate for that. And I may not even know I'm doing it, but I'm in that space. And therefore he says, the hatred that happens is, I cannot be in a real relationship with somebody because it's too threatening for me. It's not what you did, it's not what you said. I'm going to find excuses. It's the very existence of a relationship is very, very difficult. I need to hide, I need to be in isolation. For me, it's a survival skill, it's a coping mechanism. So in that sense, the sinner is completely an internal condition in me, and it's really chinam. It's a pity. Because you don't have to live in that space. You can live in an expansive space. You can live in a place of openness. You can live in a place of infinity. You can live in a place of oneness, a place of bittul, rather than yeshus. That was the main... and as somebody put it at the end of the shiur, in a way, the word sinas chinam in another context could be translated sometimes also as self-hate. As self-hate. Because, v'ahavta l'reacha kamoicha. Right? Love somebody like you love yourself. So it's not only love somebody like you love yourself, it's also, there has to be that kamoicha. But real yeshus means there's no true self-acceptance. The self-acceptance has to be created every moment through my arrogance, which comes from my insecurity, and therefore the v'ahavta l'reacha is also very difficult. That was more or less the main point that we discussed. With some more explanation and insight, you could watch the shiur again. It's all available for replay on the yeshiva.net. Also with the source sheets, by the way, the Maimer. Okay, let's go now further. Sif Hey. This explains, it says in Svarim of Kabbalah, from the Arizal, that Midian, we're all talking about Midian here, the Milchama of Midian, right? Midian means strife. It says in Zohar, Midian comes from the word Modoin, Meriva, strife, hatred. You have the 7 nations, Knani, Chiti, Emoiri, Prizi, Chivi, Yivusi, Girgoshi. It says in Sifrei HaKabbalah that that's the 7 Midas Rois, that the Jews have to conquer inside themselves. And it's manifested in the 7 tribes also, but it starts inside yourself. The 7 nations, V'charis, Imei, Abris, we say in the morning, Losses, Eretz Aknani, Achiti, Emoiri, Prizi, Yivusi, Girgoshi, Losses, Lazare, that's the 7 Midas in the person. Midian is not one of the 7, but it's called Nikmas Hashem. Losses Nikmas Hashem b'Midian. The only Milchama that's called a Nekama for Hashem. So he says, because Midian is the source. It's the source of it, because ultimately all of the Midas Rayas come from a sense of isolation and brokenness, and that's rooted in the concept of Madin and Meriva, the discord, contention, which is rooted in Olam HaTayum, where there's that inner sense of separateness. I'm really isolated. So this clip of Midian, it says in Kabbalah, is menagid l'sfiras hachachma. He says it's in opposition to the quality, to the characteristic, to the sphere known as chachma. The Isa b'ma'irei, one of the encyclopedic works of Kabbalah is called Ma'irei. Ma'irei was a sefer that was written by a man named Reb Meir Papirash. He was born a few decades after the Arizal passed away. He was a student of the students of the Arizal. And he learned by Reb Shmuel Vital, who was a son of Reb Chaim Vital, who was the Talmud of the Arizal, and he's the one who had all the writings of the Arizal. And the Ma'irei dedicated his life to edit and publish the works of the Arizal. And he himself wrote many, many svarim. One of them is called Ma'irei. And over there, he goes through the Aleph Bais, like an encyclopedia, and he explains every word, he'll go Oir and Avram and Adam and explain it based on Kabbalah, that's Sefer Ma'irei. So it's a foundational work in Nister. So Mareches Mem, in Mareches Mem is the entry of Mem, Yisid Gimel v'Zelashayne, based on the Ksavim of the Arizal. Midian Nikreas HaKlipa L'Kavil Abba. Midian is the clip of the shell that parallels, that opposes Zel L'Kavil Zeh. It's Keneged, L'Kavil in Aramaic, it's Keneged Abba. Abba is the father. Father is a metaphor always for Chachma. There's the mother and there's the father. Abba and Imah, right? Chachma is the father. And Bin is called the mother. Because Chachma is like the seed. And Bin is the expansion of the seed, right? Chachma is like the epiphany, the insight, the seed of life. And then Bin is the mother who develops it. The seed pollinates the egg, and then she develops an embryo and a vlad and a fetus, all the way until it becomes, Be'ezer Hashem, a full-fledged child and can give birth to the Midas. So it's a mashal, father and mother. So that's why he says l'kavalab. At kan l'shayna. This is the exact language of Ma'irei. And again, this is from the Arizal. He says in the footnotes, it's from the Likutei Torah of the Arizal. You have it in the Sefer Alikutim of the Arizal. What's the connection to why you say Midian is against Chachma? Say it's against Binis, say it's against Gvurech, man. It's not Stam Oisius. He says now you'll understand. Because Kiyadua the Chachma b'chinas habitl. Because the Nekuda of Chachma and all of the characteristics of a person and all of the spheres, Chachma the most represents the Nekuda of Bittel. What's Bittel? Bittel means openness to something that is beyond me, where I become a manifestation of that reality. Bittel is the ultimate humility, the ultimate openness for a person to be a conduit for divine infinity. So for that I have to open up my ego and get out of my prison, like the mashal we gave last time with the shell of the egg. The shell of the egg protects the chick. But at some point, the egg has to crack. The shell has to crack open for the chick to see the light of the sun. And if not, what's going to happen? It's going to suffocate. The very chick it's trying to protect, it's going to suffocate it, right? It's originally a mashal from the Alter Rebbe in a Maimer of Purim. We learned that all Hashem created, the way He created the world of botany, is that every fruit, every vegetable, all grain, it has a klipa that protects it. If it wouldn't have it, it would not be able to survive through the climate, through the winter or through the summer. Every fruit, every vegetable, it has its own mechanism. Right? Sometimes it needs a very thick shell, sometimes it needs a thin shell. It's incredible, but everything has its own mechanism. In order to be able to develop on the tree, it should become ripe, and you should be able to eat it. Whether it's the peel of a banana or what's the peel of an orange, or it's the thin peel of the apple or of the grape, whatever it is, every payday. So the chick, the same is true in Balechayim. The egg protects it. and the chicken sits on the egg, and if you would crack the egg because you want to see the pnimius, what's going to happen? The chick didn't even have a chance to develop. In Maseches Parshas Daf Ches, there's a debate between Rabbi Shua ben Chananya and the Sabi de Beyasuna, right, the elders of Athens. It's a whole sug in the beginning of Parshas. So one of the questions they asked him is, they were trying to prove the truth of Greek philosophy over Yiddishkeit. It's a very interesting sugya. So one of the questions they asked him is, when a chick dies inside the egg, where does the neshama go out from? The neshama is trapped in the egg. Where does it go out from? And this was a victory against Judaism. It's all riddles. So Rabbi Shua ben Chananya says, the same place, the same way through which it got in. The same path that it used to get into the egg. The same path it uses to get out. He won. He won the debate. You have to understand what it means over there, because obviously it's a symbol for something. So the Marsha's explanation is the Maharal of Prague. This is from Reb Nachman, this is from the Vilna Gaon, a lot of the Kedushas Levi, a lot of different explanations. But the Nekuda is, the egg is very protective. It's gewaldig. Until a certain point. Once it hits a certain point, what happens? Now it becomes a killer. Right? It's a paradox. The very thing that protected you, that you should be thankful to, now it's a malach hamavis. It suffocates the poor chicken to death. Fakert, it has to break open, not because it's insecure, because its whole tachlis was to raise the chick until it's ready to emerge and hatch and see the light of the sun and enjoy its life like Riches Yamav V'Shanim Tovos in the gardens and swamps of Monsey. So you have here the paradox exactly of what klippa is. Sometimes it actually protects you, but when it protects you too much, garnish geblieben, there's nothing left. And that's exactly how Hashem made the world spiritually and psychologically as well. Right? You talk about the Nefesh HaBahamas, the animal soul, ego, Yetzer Hara, klippa, all this. It has a very special function. It's not a waste. It's not evil essential. It's the shell of the egg. What often happens is it steps out of line and it substitutes life, and then I become a prison to that which was trying to protect me, and I don't even know about the me it was trying to protect. The poor chick is dead, and now the chick needs a life, so suddenly the shell of the egg is now responsible to create identity. That's sad. You understand how this works in a person's life? A person could live their whole life like that. So what do you mean? I live in a place of a klippah, and I live in a place of a shell. It's like you say, he's a shell of a person. You ever heard that expression? Huh? A shalachtz. Shalachtz is a shell. I guess the word shalachtz comes from shell, I don't know. Or the other way around. Huh? What came first, the chicken or the egg? Very good. That's the shaila, right? Klippe kadma lepri. It's an expression, klippe kadma lepri, because it was there for the pri. And the same is true in every person's life. When you look at all of the different shells that we have, if you go down to the depth, you'll see it was there ultimately to serve and to protect. But with some form of dysfunction, with some form of brokenness that happened, it takes over. And I can never see the face of the sun. So what's the difference between bittul and yeshes? Bittul is that ability for the person to be able to see the face of the sun and open themselves up to be a channel for Hashem's light in this world. That's bittul. Like we say, when you're mavat in bittul in halacha is, you become part of that which you're bottled to. The separateness is nullified in the presence of infinity. Yeshus is, I'm going to hold on to that separateness, right? And I'm going to have to create a whole life based on it. And it's a life essentially of isolation. So Chachma represents, in a person's characteristic, Chachma represents the inyan of bittul. The Zeu inyan Chachma, Koyach ma. We learned many times, it says in Zohar, Chachma is two words, Koyach ma. What does Koyach ma mean? This is from Zohar. Koyach ma is like Moshe Rabbeinu said, V'nachnu ma, what are we? It's the koyach to say what. It's the real power of curiosity to say what, to wonder. In other words, the ability for transcendence. It's also the koyach that you say ma, what is it? Because it's not defined by a particular identity. Shubchinas habitl betachlis ba'erin seif. In avodas Hashem, Chachma represents complete oneness, complete alignment with the light of infinity. Blessed be He. And Chachma brings bittul also into the midas. The midas are into a person's emotions and sensations and experiences. In Olam Hatikun versus Olam Hatoyu, we spoke about Olam Hatikun versus Olam Hatoyu. There's something called Shem Ma. Ma is Yud Kei Vav Kei spelled out. Yud Vav Daled Hey Aleph Vav Aleph Vav Hey Aleph is 45. That's called Shem Ma in Kabbalah, the name of Hashem that spells out 45. It's also the gematria of Adam. Aleph Daled Mem is Mem Hey, and that's V'nachnu Ma, and that is Koyach Ma. If you don't understand all the terminology, it's fine. It's it's a lot of new stuff here, but you want to try. We just want to get the nekuda. V'ayin mashakasim is a barichas b'tayres Chaim de b'ramaschal b'reishis drush habes. V'lechein b'chinas chachma u'b'tachlis ha'iskalulus, and that's why chachma represents always iskalulus, integration. During the epiphany, the idea will always be cohesive in one, brief and short and concise. It's explained elsewhere. The Zohar speaks about Hashem says, Atem Eda, you're my witnesses, Binyan is Havus Ha'oisius B'Pchinas Eschalkus, Shazel Why They Are Midas Dafka. Avu Mitzad HaChochmein B'Pchinas Eschalkus Ba'oisius. In reality, there's the way the world becomes defined by letters, by stories, by words. So that happens at a later stage. In Chachma itself, there's no division yet in Oisius. You see it also in a person. When you have that epiphany, that light bulb goes off, there's no oisius yet. There's a few, the oisius, what's felt is more an idea, and that's why you can't write it or you can't say it yet. In Bina and later, in the Midas, there's a lot of oisius. Everything takes on forms of stories and letters, it's elaborate. In a state of Chachma, it still yet didn't take on the forms of letters and paragraphs and sentences that happens later in Bina and then in the Midas, because over there it's all in a state still of more Ein Sof, more infinity, doesn't have yet a concrete form. It's not a contradiction to what's explained, that the beginning of division, of Heichaltzu, of fragmentation, is in Meichin and awareness. In some places it's explained that the real Achdus comes from something beyond Meichin, from the Ratzon Pashat, Yichidush Benefesh, the desire that's beyond Tam V'das, beyond rationale. Because once you hit the place of Seichel, of Meichin, of awareness, there's always division. The Gemara says, Ein de Yisei and Shabbos. People's opinions are not the same. In Brachas and Sanhedrin, everyone has a different mindset. People are different. The way you grasp something, the way I grasp something, the moment, even in Chachma, the moment you talk about Hasaga grasping, every person has their own mindset, their way of looking at the world, their own understanding. So the Achdus comes from something that's beyond Meichin. Here you're saying, Fakerta, the Achdus is in Chachma, and that's why Midyan is against Chachma. V'gam kol inyan ha-Meichin ula-hagbil kol davar. Fascinating description. What's the whole inyan of Meichin, of understanding? It's really to limit everything, to give it a definition. Shaydeza toifus is a inyan sichli. There's an expression toifus. What's to be toifus? You have physically being toifus something, but there's also intellectually. You say, you're toifus the inyan, you grab it. So in order to grab something, you need to give it a shape, right? You can't grab infinity. You need to give it a shape. Ki kol tfiso aydei shetoifus bavav k'tzavas shaladavar. Every tfisa, every grasp is by grasping the 6 dimensions of it. Whether Mizrach, Ma'irav, Darim, Tzaf, and Ma'ila, Mata. Yeah, I want to grasp. I want to grasp something. So it has to have dimensions. It has to have borders. It has to have boundaries. There's this border. There's this border. I can grasp it from this side, from this side, from this side, from this side, from many sides. Right? Something without borders, without boundaries, without definitions, without limits. How do you capture it? How do you grasp it? Somebody wants to take a picture. Yeah, you say, want to capture the moment. So you need a fixed moment, right? A Kodak moment. Allah v'shalom. But The concept is, you want to chap it in order to be teufus it, and that's why seichel is always about definitions, descriptions. You'll say the greatest magidei shiurim, lecturers, teachers, they know how to be magder something. What does the word magder mean? You know what the word magder means? From the word geder. What's a geder? You know how to create fences. Fences? Yes, fences. Because infinite expansiveness, it's in the world of silence, of transcendence, of bittul. But you need oisius. Hagdara needs oisius. Oisius, define it. And define it clearly. And cut, trim oisius. It's a letter from the Rambam. He says, I don't have time, so therefore I'm writing a long letter. I don't have time, so I'm writing a long letter. Right? It takes much more time to write a short letter. You know, say what you want to say, and say it, and say what you said, and that's it, and sit down. So the whole inyan of Meichin is what? He says, lahagbil kol dover, fakert, to put it in its own framework. Magder. Ukamaykin kol inyan shenitfas b'seichel, ulefi shaseichel magbil es ha'inyan. What we do physically with our hands, our brain tries to do with ideas, with consciousness. It tries to be teufus, not physically, but intellectually. That's the brilliant process of the brain. So therefore, it always needs to be magbil the inyan. It has to limit it in order for it to make it accessible. I can't put infinite coffee into this cup, because the cup is 8 ounces or 7 ounces or 9 ounces, whatever it is. 10? Sorry. L'chaim.
How you call it coffee if it's infinite?
The
question is, how can you call it coffee if it's infinite?
So that's true with a cup, right? With a physical cup. But there's also a cup here. There's also a cup. I want to fit it into my cup. So what does my brain do? My brain captures it. What's it mean it captures it? It has to define it. It has to limit it. That's the process called moichin. That's what awareness does. V'gam kol inyan ha'seichel hu lechalek hu lefarer kol dover l'ribi pratim dafka. Weiter, further, the whole inyan of seichel is, it divides, it dissects. Lefarer means it crumbles. It dissects all the details. This is this detail, this nuance, this detail. It's a real process of dissecting. Just a general picture of something, it's not real understanding. You have to really be teufus it. Granular, beautiful, yeah. It's a granular process. And the more granular you become, the more you get it, the more you grasp it. So moichin is about heichaltzu. It's dafka about grasping, which means you turn it into something that can be grasped. And that's a process. You'll see, for example, infants, children growing up, as their moichin are developing. We spoke about this once. If you put in a crib an apple or a raisin, or you give the infant a cup, they could look at the apple for 45 minutes. They could turn the raisin around in their finger for an hour and a half and look at it. They could look at the cup and marvel at it, right? Now give an adult a cup and say, look at the cup, right? If you give it more than a second, it's already a chiddush. You're checking your phone. Look at a raisin. Okay, bite it pre-8 and you eat it. What's there to look at? Why is that? Because we have names for it. The name kills the curiosity. I look at it, I know what it is. It's a cup. What's there to look at? It's a cup. You look at the raisin. What's there to look at? It's a raisin, for heaven's sake. The child never knew that it was a raisin. So he looks at it. You understand? By giving something a name, you trap it. You trap it. Vayikra Adam Shemesh. It's a beautiful thing in the world of moichin. For infinity, it's a tragedy. Because it's where you tell stories and you turn it, you put it into a box. But that's the function of moichin. That's what it does. That's when you can tell stories, you can build theories, you can build theses, you can make blueprints. It's a blessing. But it's also, we have to realize, it turns everything into a defined reality. It's a story. It is what it is. In our lives, our experiences are our experiences. But it's the stories we tell about our experiences that really have the greatest impact. The experience is the experience, but how do you process it? That's the key. What's the story that you tell about it? Right? Animals are not so good at telling stories. It's not their chush. They don't have this type of brain. They have a brain, but it functions in a different way. Human beings are brilliant at telling stories. That's what we do. Mitzvah l'sapeh, mehet nishtov d'tzel ha'maisas. From a very young age, we learn to capture everything. We give it meaning, we give it definition. It's beautiful, but it also could be a trap, because it takes infinity and it puts it into finiteness. The Maharal writes, and the Balatanya explains, Moshe was kvad peh or kvad lashon. He couldn't speak. Why? So al pi nigla, it's because what happened to his mouth. He had a speech impediment. The Medrash tells a story with the coal, the gold and the coal. Al pi nista, the vart is, because Moshe comes from the world where you can't articulate it in words, because ein soif, you don't articulate. The moment you articulate it, it's already not that. It's already a tremendous symptom. It's kvad peh, kvad lashon. The Zohar says, kvad peh, Torah shebeksav, kvad lashon, Torah shebal peh. You want me to do Torah shebeksav, but I can't do either of it. This is writing, this is speaking, it's not for me. The Maharal of Prague writes, it's a very deep vart, just say the nekuda of it. It says in Meseches Nida, Daf Lamed, that a tinek b'mei imoy, malamde noise kol ha-Torah kula. Right, the 9 months, you learn the whole Torah. Neir daluk al roshai, and there's no time in life that is so blissful. The Gemara says that Adam shari b'toiva, like in the womb of mother. The gedenkst? Huh? Nechemi, the gedenkst? It was nice. You want to go back? The Balatanya, his shver, didn't get along with him because he was opposed to Chassidus. So he threw him out. He wanted he should get divorced. So he had to leave. It was a place called Vitebsk. When the shver passed away, his name was Abihuda Leib Segel. He was very wealthy. So the shviger was alive, and she appreciated her son-in-law. She said, come back, and I'll support. So how do you say no to your shviger when you're the Balatanya? How do you say no? I know how other people say no to the shviger, but how do you say no? So this is how he said. He said, he said, the Gemara says that in the womb of the mother is the best time. There's no best time. But once you leave, megeit nish tzedek. Once you leave the womb of the mother, megeit nish tzedek. Right? You don't go back to the womb. So he's not coming back. He stayed in Lyosh, he didn't go back to Vitebsk. It's in Belarus, White Russia. So the nekuda is, so he learns Kol HaTorah Kula. Then he says, everybody knows the story. When he comes out, what happens? Ba malach, the sotrei al piv, right? Umashak Kol HaTorah Kula. He gives you a little, whatever the word is, a flick, a schnell in and a schnell they used to call it. Yeah, a flick or a little patch, and you forget the whole Torah. So the Maharal says, what's pshat? It says al piv, on top of the mouth. What's al piv? So this is what he writes. The Maharal says that this satre al piv, it's not a physical. The malach comes and smacks you on the way out, and that's why you start crying, because you just got a frask. It's the first frask you get in life from an angel. The pshat is satre al piv. The ability to be able to start speaking with your mouth is what's going to make you forget Kol HaTorah Kula. And the diuk here is Kol HaTorah Kula. What does it mean that in 9 months you learn Kol HaTorah Kula? How do you learn in 9 months Kol HaTorah Kula? People don't learn in 90 years Kol HaTorah Kula. In Gan Eden, Moshe Rabbeinu was sitting for 3,000 years already, and they're still learning, right? There's no WhatsApp in Gan Eden. So they're learning for 3,000 years. It's Ein Sof. So what's said in 9 months? You learn Kol HaTorah Kula. You learn a lot. So he says the diuk is Kol HaTorah Kula. You learn the Kol of Torah. Kol HaTorah Kula means the Ein Sof of Torah, the infinity of Torah that encompasses Kol HaTorah Kula. There's a Tosefta in Sanhedrin, Perek Vav. Kol HaTorah Inyan Echad. All of Torah is one theme. What, the whole Torah is one theme? Really? Muktzah, and Eidavin, and Sharsha Nagach, and Ksuvis, and Chulin, and Tumah, and Tara, and Brachas. It's all one theme. There's a Nekuda, Kol HaTorah Kula, before there's words. But the moment Torah morphs into a place of words, it's not Kol HaTorah Kula anymore. Everything has a Hagbal, everything has a definition, everything has a description. That's word, that's what words do. It takes infinity, can't deal with infinity. It needs a story, and a story needs a beginning and a middle and an end. A shiur needs a beginning, a middle, and an end. It needs structure, and structure is all about finiteness, Hagbala. So he says, the fetus experiences the oneness. It's a different way of processing reality. The little baby in the crib looks at a raisin, doesn't see a raisin. What is it? He doesn't have words. That's a glimmer of Ein Sof. As we get older, we have the blessing and the curse. It's both. Not relating to infinity anymore. Everything now has a definition, a description. And that's what Moichin is. So Moshe says, sorry, I can't speak. I don't do that for a living. It's not my thing. The moment you say it, now I'm talking about this, so it's a little funny, right? You know when people start to talk about how they shouldn't talk? That's basically what I'm talking about. Right? The truth is, that's why silence is so much better than talking. You ever notice that? Look who's talking. I don't know if you know, there's a Yerushalmi, Rabbi Yoina brings it in Shari Tshuva. Bekushi hitiru ledaber divrei Torah b'Shabbos. The Chazal, calm, they were matir to speak words of Torah on Shabbos. So the Alter Rebbe says in the Torah, so was on Shabbos. He says you should be quiet. Or you should sing. He says in one place you should sing. Negina. Negina is aliyas ha'olamas. You should sing. Bekushi yitiru ledaber divrei Torah b'Shabbos. Understand what we speak about? Divrei Torah. You have a Dvar Torah. So nicht so Pashat, Bekushi. They were matir it, but it's not so Pashat. Because Shabbos is the aliyas ha'olamas from Gvul to Ein Sof. You relate a little bit to what I'm saying. That raisin, I give it a name. The moment I give it a name, boom, I put a lid on it, it's done. Now, with a raisin, it's not so terrible. But when you do it with your life, it's nicht so Pashat. What's the word for curse in Lashon Kodesh? Bilam uses it, yeah? Kava liyas ha'am hazeh, kava. The word kava, right, is similar to the word kuba, which is a box. Or noikev shem Hashem mois yumas. What's noikev? Right, kava, cursing. Lavan tells Yaakov, nakva alai, you taught Parshas, nakva alai scharcha. How do you teach in Cheder nakva? Enumerate, define. Why is that a curse? Because when you do that to your life, it's a curse. You define yourself. You put yourself into a box. This is who I am. This is the story. That's a challenge. You know, when animals experience a very serious experience, for example, an antelope is being chased by a cheetah, and the cheetah bites into it, but the antelope escapes. We call it trauma, right? The mazel is that the animals don't read our articles, so they don't know what we call it. So they wanted to see if when the antelope comes back to the family, if it has PTSD. It should have PTSD, MS. So they noticed something fascinating. I don't know if you ever read about this. It's interesting. The antelope gets away from the cheetah. For around 30 seconds or a minute or a few minutes, it starts shaking violently. Like you think it's having a seizure. It's not, it's shaking. It shakes off the experience. It goes back. It never happened. You know why? It doesn't tell stories. Imagine if it start telling a story. Probably my mother hates me. My father also hates me. They probably set me up. The cheetah for sure hates me. God, mamish hates me. So who am I? I'm a lo yutzlach shlam mazel shlamiel nudnik a godnish a fair da beheme a shegitz a shtik sheretz a shtik menuvel a mushchus a metuv. The poor antelope now goes back to yeshiva, and what is it thinking about you itself? But they don't tell stories. All it knows is that was not comfortable. That's I know. That's a sincere. It's not comfortable. No stories. Shakes it off. It was painful. Boom. Next, we tell stories. Nakva alai. So you could tell beautiful stories, but you can also tell different stories. But even when I tell a beautiful story, it's a story. And every story detaches you from the kol ha-Torah, from the oneness. So this is what the Maral says. Bam malach v'satrei al piv. You're going to be able to talk about it. It's meshakche kol ha-Torah. You don't have access to that oneness, to that Ein Sof. And that's what happens often in Yiddishkeit also. It becomes everything about definitions, descriptions. Everything is defined. You don't get the connection to the Ein Sof, because it comes into the words of Dibur. So the definition of Seichel is Heichaltzu. What's Heichaltzu? You need to grasp it. So you're saying here that Chachma is Bittel and Chachma is Iskalalus, but the whole union of Meichin is Fakert, Hakbala. So he says, Hine kolze ikri b'mayach habina. Shu b'chinas hasaga v'avon b'chinas tfisa b'seichel mamash, shaz ba'adav b'niba yischalkus dafka. V'o b'chinas hachachma, ime yoshu gamkin mitziyas seichel, mikol mokem eine b'chinas tfisa v'hasaga mamash. Kiyim b'chinas nekuda klolis adayin, l'mayla b'chinas yischalkus, l'pratum ki yadu mavor b'makamach. It's really the difference of Chachma and Bina. Chachma is called Re'iyah, Bina is called Shmiyah. It's like seeing and hearing. What's the difference of seeing and hearing? When you come in, let's say, to a museum or to a house, and you see a beautiful piece of art, what do you see? You see the whole thing in one shot. And then you could stand and analyze details. You see the klal, then you see pratim. When you hear a story, if somebody tells me about the piece of art, what do I hear? Detail after detail after detail. And at the end, I try to construct a picture. The difference of seeing and hearing is, in seeing, you start with the full picture. And then you analyze the details. In hearing, you never start that way. You start with the details, and then you get to the full picture afterwards. So he says that's the difference of Chachma and Bina. Bina really is all about Heichaltzu. It's about division. It's about granular dissection. Chachma is also Seichel, but the main idea of Chachma is not to grasp it. Chachma is like seeing it. It's the epiphany beyond pratim, beyond details. You'll see the difference of Chachma and Bina in a person's life when you're struggling with an idea. You read something or you have a dilemma and you're trying to figure it out and it's not going in. Right? We spoke about this a few times, the Maimer of Korach v'Ovid Halevihu. So what happens? Suddenly you're walking in the street and you have this epiphany. This lightning goes off in your brain, right? They call it a light bulb moment. It's like a flash of wisdom, flash of inspiration. And there's clarity. You have that feeling. It's like, ooh. That's it. Oh, what? I can't talk about it yet. It overtakes you. Then there's Bina. Bina is developing the idea, structuring it. Then you could talk about it. In Bina, you'll never have the same clarity and light that you had in Chachma. In fact, most people, you always try to go back to that moment. But if you didn't write it down, and usually it's very hard to write down because it's like a lightning, it comes and goes, you're never going to have that clarity, because in Chachma, it's not that you got it got you. Chachma is the moment of bittul, where your intellectual ego surrenders, and therefore there could be a flow from the superconscious into the conscious, and you grasp it because there was no you. And therefore there's no division in pratim. Bina is fakert. Bina is where you reassert your intellectual identity, and you become the definer of the idea. You compartmentalize it, you grasp it. So he says that's the difference. Chachma is more the experience which is beyond pratim. It's beyond Heichaltzu. It's beyond Tfisa v'Hasaga. It's the idea, but the way the idea transcends particularities and details and words. And Bina, that's already where there is Tfisa, where there's an intellectual ego that defines everything and turns it into a granular experience where you dissect it into nuances, into details. It's like building a structure. That's the difference of Chachma and Bina. So when you say Moichen wants to be magbil everything, that's Bina. Chachma fakert. Chachma is the bittul to the idea beyond trying to turn it into a specific story. And that's why Chachma, he says, that's what opposes Midian. But there's another nekuda here. You get the nekuda. That's the difference of Chachma and Bina. Bina is tfisa, and Chachma is bittul. And that's why Chachma doesn't sustain itself. It happens and it's gone. Because it happens in a space where there's no I. It's like you lose yourself. You're mesmerized by it. You forfeit your identity in it. Yeah. Right. I'm talking about shmiya of ideas. If somebody tells me a story or an idea, it's detail by detail. I'm listening. It's like you're listening to a class, right? So you hear one detail, another line, and at the end you put it all together and you create a picture. In seeing, it's the opposite. You start with the picture. It's like, oh, wow. You see it all. You see one picture. In Bina, you hear details, and from the details, you create one picture. In Chachma, you see one picture, and then later you're going to dissect it into details. One is klal, and one is prat. Yeshli koil, yeshli rav. Koil is iskalalus, integration. And that's always connected to bittul, because it's going away from the formulation of reality into finite tfisa, which is a form of yeshus. Yeshus in a very subtle sense here. We're not talking, bin is not about insecurity, but it's the concept of yeshus where it needs to have its separate identity. And that's what finiteness is. V'oidzes is another nekuda. The pchinis is chalkus hazois the chachma v'seichel harei tachlisa hu ha'iskalus dafka. There's something even deeper. The real purpose of the granular divisions and compartmentalizations of seichel, the ultimate purpose is to create integration. Ki yadua sheyesh beis minei ischalkus. There's two types of ischalkus. Ischalkus means from the word chaluka, right? Yachloiku, division. The word machloikus comes from this. What's machloikus? Division, strife. Because there's two types of divisions. There's two types of dissecting, of creating different parts, ischalkus, to be mechalek, to split, which is the whole idea of what we said, what bina is, to split, to define, to dissect, to compartmentalize. It has two different reasons. Ha'alef b'chinas ha'eschalkus shegoyrem lasas apiru dafka. There's ischalkus division that causes separation, fragmentation, strife. That's one type of ischalkus. He's going to give a mashal that he's going to get back to later. It's going to be a little bit of a difficult mashal, but let's see. Ischalkus hakoiches atzmim shein mecholokim be'etzem zeh mizeh she'ein lehem kesher v'chibur v'iskalo zeh mizeh. Koiches atzmim means innate characteristics of a person. When you divide them to the point that they're not connected, koich hachesed atzmi, koich hagvura atzmi, he b'bchinas tachlis hapirid v'ischalkus zeh mizeh. If you go to the core of chesed, it's self-contained. You go to the core of gvura, it's self-contained. V'mizgalo ha'koiches k'moy shehein lo yizbulu zeh klal k'moy shekasov b'makamacher. V'zeh ha'inyan sviras de toyu l'mayla, shenizgalo ha'sviras k'moy shehein b'pshitusim b'bchinas hakudim, v'lachein hoyu b'bchinas hafchim u'menagdim zeh lo gamne k'moy shekasov b'makamacher. We learned this once in a Maimon Torah Parshas Noach at length about nakudim, brudim, if you remember. But here's the nakuda. What happened in Tayu was, every midah came out in its full rawness. And in its full rawness, it had no space for anything else, no compromise. I am reality. Chesed is reality. There's no space for Gvura. Gvura says, I am reality. There's no space for anything else. And that's why they collided with each other, because they could not deal with each other. So that's where his chalkos creates a pirud. You are you, and that you becomes the whole center. I am mine, that becomes the whole center. So we have to split. There has to be a pirud. We cannot coexist in the same home or in the same mental space or in the same reality. The oifen Bais who is chalkus shegoyrem iskalalus dafka. there's another type of Heichaltzu, another type of division that actually creates unity. When you take one thing and you dissect it and you see all the details, then it creates more unity. When two things are separate, so when you divide them, you just see that they're separate. We're not connected. But if it's one thing, and you bring out the various details and nuances and components in a granular fashion, this Heichaltzu actually creates much more unity, creates much more Heichaltzu, much more Achdus. You understand what he's saying here? Sometimes Heichaltzu is the best thing for Achdus. Depends if it's two things or it's one thing. If it's two things, so they're really separate. So as long as you don't divide them, you camouflage the separateness. If you get into the details, you see, this is this. If it's one thing, you don't need to camouflage the oneness by making them the same. They're one. So fakert, by having each one identify its prat, so they stop competing with each other, they could become more one. The unity could become much stronger, much more authentic, much deeper, because it's davar echad. Maybe a very simple example for this is, he's going to say it a little later in learning. In the yeshivish world, they always say the Chaim briske, the Chaim Soloveitchik, the briske derech was always to be mechalik. Das is adin in the gavre, und das is adin in the cheftze. Yeah? Das is adin in the mazik, und das is adin in the nizik. Yeah. Shnei dinim, meaning Reb Chaim's method is you have contradictions. So that means they're fighting with each other. Two Rambams that don't agree. They're fighting with each other. Do you hold this? Do you hold this? So what do? So you need a Heichaltzu. You need to dissect it. And you need to show and get to the core of it. And then you see they're not fighting. Here you're addressing one nekuda. Here you're addressing another nekuda. So by creating this Heichaltzu, you actually created Achdus. You created unity. The Rambam is not contradicting himself. The Gemara is not contradicting itself. Here, the Heichaltzu, it allows everything to have its own space. And we're not against each other. You have this space, I have this space. The Heichaltzu makes the Achdus. Take it in terms of a relationship. When you're really one, you never have to be afraid of Heichaltzu. Fakert, it's going to bring out much more the Achdus, because you'll see the role that everyone plays. Let's talk, for example, in arguments between people, right? A couple. Do they always agree? If somebody says, I'm going to have an amazing marriage. You know why? Somebody once told me, I'm never going to disagree with my wife, and I already see that my wife never disagrees with me. I smiled, but I was thinking, good luck. Come back in a couple of years. He was a chassan. She finishes my sentences, I finish her sentences. It's a beautiful thing, no? Shouldn't you tell every chassan and kala, go into your marriage and never disagree with each other? It's beautiful. But there's a problem. What's the problem? The problem is, that means that it's a superficial oneness. Because you do have a different personality than me. So the disagreement is not coming from negativity. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, you want them to agree about everything? Unless somebody amputates their identity, you can't agree about everything. Why are there so many debates in Mishnayos and Gemara? Why couldn't they just agree? Shalom! Achdus, it's the 3 weeks, Achdus, stop arguing. Beis Shammai, darfst du sich dingen, stop it, can't any page of Gemara, can't they stop arguing? Rav, Shmuel, come on, Chevre, Achdus Yisrael. It's 3 weeks, look over Tisha B'Av. Wait till after Sukkot, you'll start fighting again. They don't stop. Rav and Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan and Shlokish. And Abaye and Rav and Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Nachman and Avinu and Rabbi Ashi. And Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Shammai, Beis Hillel. What's the pshat? So it says in Pirkei Avos, Kol machlokes shel L'shem Shamayim sofer l'Iskayim. A machlokes for the sake of heaven is going to endure. So the Maharal writes, he has a pirush in Pirkei Avos, Derech Chaim. The Maharal of Prague. So he says, the machlokes is L'shem Shamayim. What's pshat is L'shem Shamayim? It's part of their connection to Shamayim. Sofer l'Iskayim. We're not afraid of it. We're not afraid of it. Beis Shammai's neshama came from Gvura. It says in Zohar. Beis Hillel's neshama came from Chesed. They have to disagree. It's not authentic if they disagree. If Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel say, let's make peace, it's not authentic. Beis Shammai is not being Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel is not being Beis Hillel. They're covering up their differences by creating a mask of unity. It's a camouflage. What's bad? What's bad about it? Parshas. If one day you want to be authentic and you come out, what's going to be? You look, I can't get along with you. Have a good day. What makes a relationship powerful is we actually disagree with each other. We don't agree. Huh? But we disagree. We disagree. When you're really one, you don't have to be afraid of Heichaltzu. When you're not one, then you have to be afraid of Heichaltzu. You know why? Because if you don't camouflage the oneness, it's going to reveal the truth. We're not one. We're separate. If you're one, Heichaltzu is a maila. This has this nekuda, this has this nekuda. You bring this to the table. If partners are working in a company, an investment, everyone says exactly the same thing. It's the worst thing for the company. You have different people around the table, yeah? This one is a creative type. This one is more conservative, right? This one is risky. They takes risks. This one doesn't want to take risks. And they argue with each other, and every person brings their soul and their identity. So it creates a much bigger picture. And it creates much more, it's more beneficial for every person. And each one gains much more from the other person because you broaden my horizons and I broaden your horizons. That machlokes you don't want to get rid of. It's not a bad machlokes. It's not a negative one. Fakert. It creates much more iskalalus because we don't have to butt heads with each other. Because you shine in this area, I shine in this area. It's like in a body, in a guf. Imagine all the limbs say, it's time to make achdus. Let's all do the same thing. What's going to happen to the guf? Yizgadal v'yizkadash. You can call the Chavre Kadisha. By everybody doing their thing, it doesn't create pirud. It creates achdus. It creates unity. Everyone can appreciate each other, respect each other, gain from the other. It's like a symphony, a jigsaw puzzle. Each piece is different. And that's what makes the achdus. That's what makes the mosaic, the tapestry. You toifus? You understand the nekuda? In Toihu, every sphere came out in its full rawness, screaming, infinity, I am infinite. I have no space for you. They become separate. That was the tragedy of Toihu. Akudim is the world where all the spheres are one. Why are they one? Because Hashem transcends form. In Toihu, Nekudim, each one came out, but embodying infinity, so each one became infinite, so I have no space for you. In Berudim, there's integration because they recognize that each one of them is part of an infinite whole and you're one manifestation of it. So we're really one. It's different states of consciousness. That's the success in every relationship, in every whether it's a friendship or a marriage. The success is you have to realize we're one. And when we're one, Heichaltzu becomes an asset. It becomes a sibbe for Heichaltzu. It's also true in Avodas Hashem. The Alter Rebbe, they called him a Litvak. One of the things is, he was very into Heichaltzu. In Avodas Hashem, everything has, you have to know the differences. It's very easy to fool yourself in Avodas Hashem. right? When there's no Heichaltzu. When there's no Heichaltzu, what's pshat? Heichaltzu means there's no understanding of the different details, of the different aspects, of the different parts. So then it becomes one big blunder. And in that big blunder, you could fool yourself and you could fool others. Huh? No respect. For what? Huh? There's no respect, you say. Kavod. Yeah. People could confuse, for example, self-avoidance with spiritual enlightenment. You know the difference? I'm trying to avoid my pain by covering up and saying, I'm spiritually enlightened, so I don't feel any pain. It's a very, very subtle confusion, and it's a dangerous confusion. Because the spiritual enlightenment is fake. It's just trying to run away from pain. I'm struggling with something, but I can't deal with it, so I cover it up with this blissful sense of unity and oneness that's really superficial. Because a person needs to have Heichaltzu. You have to be able to know, this is this part of my brain, this is this part of my brain, this is this part of my identity, this is this part of my identity. And then there could be there's a much deeper unity because you're dealing with the truth of it. It becomes authentic. Because every prat brings out another real nekuda, so there's real achdus. Without it, it's more like everything is glazed over with the camouflage of oneness, and when you take that away, there's chaos. Which is why many people don't want to go to that place of Heichaltzu, because Heichaltzu brings out the truth of everything. And when the truth of everything comes out, now the question is, are you one or you're not one? If you're one, bringing out the truth of everything is going to be tremendously beneficial, because the splintering is going to create a much deeper unity that's authentic, that's real. But if it's not really one, it's the worst thing for me. It's very dangerous. So you just want to make a cover-up of oneness. When you're really one, you can have different nekudas, fakert, the different point of views are mechazik. You don't have to be afraid. That's why real unity happens only when you could confront those points where you disagree most. That's where the deepest unity. In a marriage, the deepest unity happens when the couple confronts those aspects that's driving them apart most. You understand what I'm saying? Over there. Because if you can create, they say, the unity can only happen after the first disagreement. If there's no rupture, if there's no way of dealing with rupture in a relationship, so it's not a relationship. There's going to be rupture with two people unless we're fake. Unless we're going to be, zombies. If you're going to be real people, there's going to be rupture. There's going to be machloikas. So what? You still won. But are you going to be able to heal that rupture? Are you going to be able to bring yourself together from that rupture? Then you'll have a much deeper achdus. Because the achdus will really be holistic and authentic and deep. But if at my core I'm separate from you and I don't trust you, rupture is the worst thing. Which is, by the way, some people avoid conflict like the devil. It looks like a beautiful thing, right? Achdus, achdus, achdus. Sometimes it's very dangerous. The reason I'm avoiding it is because if I stay present in the argument, I'm going to die. Because at my core, I'm isolated. So I can't trust that I and you can be present in the argument and emerge as a deeper team. I can't. I'm in isolation. So the moment there's an argument, it's a death sentence. So I have to run and avoid it like the devil and just smile. Inside, I'm dead. Does anybody relate to what I'm saying?
Yeah, but you're saying don't be an adversary.
This is not about being a mitzvah to be confrontational. Chas v'shalom, fakert.
In terms of butting heads to get to the unity.
Yeah.
Something.
It's not butting heads, with horns.
No, I'm not saying
It's the respect of conversation. Yeah.
It's Beishamai, Beisel,
Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel. The Mishnah says in Yevamis, Daf Yud Gimel, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, they argued about serious things, arayos, in Yonim of mamzeris. According to one shitta, his child is a mamzer. Still, they never stopped loving each other and marrying each other's families and eating by each other's houses, even though your house is treif, from my perspective. Yeah, not with thorn. Faket, that's the opposite. You know, this fight and this flight. It's the same thing. I fight you again because I'm so isolated that if I don't fight you, I'm dead. So either I run away and I avoid any confrontation like the devil because it's too scary and I want peace. And the reason I want peace is because I cannot have peace together with you. The peace remains very, very lonely. So the moment you emerge, I have to run or I have to crush it. But it's the same idea. You know the t-shirt, I'm easy to get along with once you learn to worship me. Right? So either I avoid it like the devil or I have to fight it. I have to destroy it. I must crush it. Why? Because I can't be present in this state. The Heichaltzu is too dangerous. Because there is a rupture in my core. In my core, I'm isolated. Back to the place of Yeshus. I am lonely. I'm not part of the infinite. So we're not one. We're enemies. It's a tragic state. It's an emotionally very difficult state. But I want to be at peace. I'm a nice guy. I don't want to fight. So either I avoid, or I crush, or I freeze. Fight, flight, freeze. But they're all responses to this inner sense of pirut. In a place of real oneness, right? Fakert, his chalkus is completely fine. That's what he says. One thing, when it's davar echad k'shemechalkem oiselid bepratim, ha'is-chalkus azois hi sibas ha'achdus. You understand? Two things, when you mechalik them, oh my God, we're going to see the truth. Don't be mechalik. Let it be one big challenge, one big, in learning also. In order to be mechalik, you have to be able to trust the process. You have to be able to have a mind of oneness. Then you could trust the process. You could say, let's be mechalik, don't worry about it. When it's one, there's trust. You can go much deeper. And the same as in Avodas Hashem. If you believe in the ultimate vision of Achdus in yourself, get into the details. Be mechalik. And then you'll come to a much, much more real and more authentic Achdus. So therefore, this is the second akudah, that the ultimate objective of the moichin, to be mechalik, is not to be mechalik. It's to be ma'achid. To be ma'achid it from a place of pratim. Obviously, in the world of infinity, you don't need this because it's all oneness. But in the place of pratim, if you want to create achdus, it's only through his chalkos. Because if not, it just becomes a superficial unity. Okay, we'll take a break here. And Be'ezer Hashem, the next shir is going to be Monday morning. What's today? Thursday. The show will be Monday morning, 7:45. We'll continue If Vov. Have a beautiful day.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.